Welcome back to the New England Players YouTube channel. I am your host and founder, Matthew Andrews. So in this video, one of the things that we wanted to explore was what are some of the golf courses in either the state of Massachusetts or perhaps in a certain vicinity of the city of Boston, Massachusetts, that could potentially be interesting hosts for the PGA Tour should it return to this particular market. And the reason why we wanted to take a look at this is because if you've been following some of the recent tour news regarding the new CEO, Brian Rolapp, one of the things that he mentioned was a couple different markets that he wanted to see if the tour could return to, perhaps coming into the year 2028. And Boston was one of those identified markets. And also some of the other markets that would potentially be on his radar for, potentially bringing a tour event to would be, again, we already mentioned Boston, of course, which is what we'll be discussing here today in this video, but also Philadelphia, Denver, Nashville, and some areas out west like the San Francisco and Seattle markets. But Boston was certainly one of the ones that he mentioned. And so one of the things that I want to do in this particular video is just take a look at some of the courses that I've identified just in my own research and just out of my own interest to see what are some of the ones that could be perhaps capable of putting on some interesting tests for the PGA Tour players and why they also might be interesting venues, perhaps just outside of the level of difficulty that the courses could potentially offer, again, as tests for the PGA Tour players. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to take a look at two courses in particular in the general New England region that have been PGA Tour hosts before. And so those two courses are, of course, the TPC River Highlands course in Connecticut, and then TPC Boston here in the state of Massachusetts. Now, in terms of overall tests, in terms of just their straight up difficulty as listed in the USGA's GIN application, I took a look at what those figures were in terms of the total yardage that the courses play from the back tees. I took a look at the ratings and the slopes of those courses as well. And then I also did some investigations as to what type of scores were shot at those particular golf courses in some of the most recent times that they've hosted the PGA Tour. So TPC River Highlands, will start there. And it continues to be the host of the Travelers Championship every year, which is, I believe, usually the event that immediately follows the United States Open. And so, again, that is, the host of the Travelers Championship, and that's in the state of Connecticut. And so if we take a look at some of the figures regarding the golf course from the GIN app by the USGA, the course tips out at around 6,800 yards or so, 6,880 in particular. The rating of the golf course, according to the app, is 74.1. The slope of the golf course is 138, and the course plays as a par 70. And that is truly what the layout of the golf course is. For example, it's not a par 72 or a par 71 that they adjust to a par 70 to make the course a little bit more difficult. It actually does play as a true par 70. And so most recently, the Travelers Championship was won by New England's own Keegan Bradley. And he shot 15 under par to take home that particular championship last year. And over the years, the scores have kind of fluctuated more or less around that number from what I've seen. So that's the kind of the overall aspects of TPC River Highlands. And then, of course, we have TPC Boston here in Massachusetts. And TPC Boston, up until the year 2020, was a longtime host of the FedEx Cup playoff event. For a long time, it was known as the Deutsche Bank Championship. It then moved in name to the Dell Technologies. And then eventually it was a course that was alternating with, I believe at the time it was Liberty National for the Northern Trust. But the Northern Trust has now become a completely different PGA Tour event, at least in terms of name. TPC Boston has not actually hosted the PGA Tour since that year in 2020. So again, from the GIN app by the USGA, the course tips out from the championship layout in that application at 7,241 yards, rating of 76.6 and a slope of 155. So again, for the normal player off the street, quite a difficult test. And its overall layout from the plain scorecard is a par 72. And in the actual tournament itself, they played it as a par 71, and they converted the 12th hole into a par 4. And the last time it was played, and again, this is according to the layout figures that I found on the PGA Tour's website, the last time it was played, they were able to stretch the golf course out to 7,308 yards. And one of the things that was most particularly striking, I would say, about that 2020 hosting of the Northern Trust is that the winner, Dustin Johnson, shot a remarkable 30 under par at that particular championship with rounds of 67, 60, 64, and 63. Now, Harris English that year was the runner-up at 19 under par. And typically, for the most part, again, looking back throughout the years that TPC Boston has hosted that tournament in one way, shape, or form, or name, whatever it was at that particular year, 15 to 20 under par, maybe a little bit under, maybe 22 under par was typically the winning score. So Dustin Johnson's 30 under par, as truly remarkable as it was certainly an outlier for the tournament. So again, you can see TPC River Highlands, TPC Boston, usually it's in that 15 to perhaps maybe 20, 22 under par range. And that's the kind of test that they typically put up. So again, either course, very strong tests, very interesting layouts. But that's kind of like where we're starting at in terms of just like what types of tests have been set up for the PGA Tour players in the New England area in recent history and throughout the last few years. All right. So based on that basis, really what I wanted to do here is just take my 5 picks that I found throughout the New England region. Particularly, again, most of these are going to be in the state of Massachusetts. A couple of them are going to be in the greater Boston area. One is actually going to be outside the state of Massachusetts, and that's one of the ones that I'm actually most excited to explore here, because it actually does have a very interesting history. And of all these courses, with the exception of maybe one on this list, it probably would be the most substantial test that the New England area could offer as far as a test, perhaps. Again, there could be some other options as well, but just keeping it within a certain vicinity of Boston. And again, also keeping it to just 5 courses. I think there's many more that could potentially fit the bill here. But these are the ones that I explored and thought might fit the bill best. All right, so starting off with perhaps the most obvious option, TPC Boston. So again, the course is tried and true as a PGA Tour host. We already know that it can host all the infrastructure as far as certain grandstands, hospitality tents, merchandise tents, hosting the media as well. We already know that all of this can be set up at TPC Boston. Also, clearly, the practice facilities at TPC Boston are sufficient enough to allow the players to warm up and go through all their pre-round routines. And again, as remarkable as Dustin Johnson's 30 under par was, as we already mentioned, again, typically the scores at this particular golf course for the tournaments that it's hosted in the past have kind of been in, again, that 15 to 20 under par range, maybe a little bit more than that, perhaps 22 under par. So we already know that it can put up as good a test as it probably needs to host the tour again. And so, again, since it has a long history of hosting the PGA Tour already, it certainly is one of the more obvious choices, I would say, to just simply have the tour return here. And it always is a good time. I've been to that tournament, a handful of times myself. Always had a good time. So, again, TPC Boston, probably the most obvious option, I would say, to have the tour return there. Now, going outside the city of Boston to a truly remarkable test of golf, we're going to now take a look at Great Horse in Hamden, Massachusetts. So this is, again, not necessarily the Boston market as you might think of it. Again, it's kind of pushing out to that greater Hartford area, being in that Springfield area of Massachusetts, which, again, you could argue already has a tournament in that area. Again, the Travelers Championship at TPC River Highlands. But in terms of golf courses in the state of Massachusetts that provide, I would say, truly extraordinary tests of golf that could put up an interesting layout against, the best players in the world, Great Horse is certainly one of the ones that I would say in the state of Massachusetts overall fits this bill. It's also been the host of many significant Massachusetts and New England tournaments as well. So this year it'll actually be the host of the New England Amateur. It was the host last year of the 2025 Massachusetts Amateur Championship. It did not play out at the overall yardage that they could test the tour at. I played a little bit shorter, I think from one set of tees up from the very, very back tees. But we already know that it's testing the best in Massachusetts and certainly the best in New England. So it certainly has a competitive, hosting pedigree behind it. It has numerous other tournaments on its calendar that it'll be hosting in the New England area in Massachusetts for years to come at this point. In terms of the overall test that this golf course can provide, it tips out at about 7,600 yards with a 79-point run rating in a 155 slope. So again, 79.1 rating, 155 slope. I would argue it's kind of difficult for a golf course to get even more difficult than that. So again, I think from a layout perspective, it certainly has what it needs to test the best players. And again, it already has, I would say, a great history of hosting significant competitive tournaments for the New England region. And Brian Silva has really just created such an extraordinary layout at this golf course. And I would say, with the exception of perhaps the U.S. Open layout at the Country Club in Brookline, again, it just probably provides the most substantial test of golf, arguably, in all of the state of Massachusetts. So, and I think it's certainly one that Boston area folks, you could have folks come down from Vermont as well, again, up from Connecticut. So I think, even though the course might appear to be remote and already in an area that perhaps has a tournament already at its disposal, Great Horse would certainly put on a fantastic test. And I think you could get a lot of people to come out into the Springfield area to this incredible golf course to watch the tour, see what they can do there. So that's one of my other picks there. That's my second pick. Coming back to the Boston area, the next two courses actually we're going to take a look at are kind of more in that South Shore region. And the reason why I also chose these next two courses is that I think you could get really creative with how you can create a tournament at these two places, in the sense that they each have 27 holes of golf on property. And so if you think about maybe having, like, on Thursday and Friday, maybe rounds being played at one of the layouts, one of the 18-hole routings on a Thursday, maybe another 18-hole layout on the Friday, and over the weekend you have the final legs of the tournament being played on perhaps the hardest of the 18-hole setups you could create there. And I think being in the South Shore area of Massachusetts, again, it's close enough to Boston that you could get all of that prime market, I think, to come down to these courses. And again, some of the conditions and the elements of these courses, I think, could put on certainly a very interesting test. So the first of these two 27-hole layouts that I think could provide an interesting setup for the tour is Crosswinds Golf Club in Plymouth. So again, you have 27 holes of golf at the Crosswinds property, and all three of the combinations that form the three different 18-hole routings are really quite substantial tests of golf in themselves. So you have the Jones We Met routing. This is from the scorecard and from the USGA Gin app. We're looking at 7,077 yards with a rating of 75.4, a slope of 143. That plays as a par 72. You have the We Met Zaharis routing. This is the longest and the most difficult of the three setups that Crosswinds has to offer. It tips out at 7,108 yards, 75.6 rating, 145 slope, again, also par 72. And Zaharis Jones is the third routing. It's the shortest of the three, plays at 7,017 yards with a 74.8 rating and a 142 slope, also a par 72. Now, again, with what we've already seen as far as layouts in the New England area, again, TPC River Highlands plays at a par 70. So I think you could easily probably make either of these routings a par 71 or a par 70 to make them even more difficult. And again, I think you can just get really creative with the overall structure and layout of the tournament. For example, again, maybe on Thursday you play Zaharis Jones. Maybe on Friday you play Jones We Met. And then for the weekend, you play the hardest routing, which is We Met Zaharis. So again, with these 27-hole routings, I think you can get really creative as far as how you set up the tournament. And again, Crosswinds Golf Club in Plymouth already has just such fantastic tests of golf already laid out as it is, even at par 70s with the ratings in the yardage. So that's one of the ones that I thought that could actually be interesting. Also kind of sticking in that same South Shore area, and again, already mentioned with 27 holes on property, we're taking a look now at the Granite Links Golf Course set up in Quincy, Massachusetts. So this one, again, is very interesting in that you have three different 18-hole setups that you can create with the 27 holes that are available on property. And the three routings go as follows. So you have the Milton Granite routing, which is 6,818 yards, 74.1 rating, 144 slope. Again, plays as a par 72. You have the Granite Quincy routing, which plays a little bit shorter. That plays at 6,735 yards with a 73 rating, a 141 slope as a par 71. And then you have the final layout, which is Quincy Milton, the Quincy Milton routing. That plays at 6,873 yards with a 73.9 rating, a 142 slope, and a par 71. So again, same kind of things I would say as Crosswinds. You can set it up to be, quite interesting with the three different combinations. Again, for example, maybe you play the Granite Quincy routing on Thursday, the Quincy Milton routing on perhaps maybe the Friday round, and then you go in ahead and play the final Milton Granite routing, which is the hardest during the weekend, or again, some combination of those three. And again, with par 72 and par 71s, you could easily chop these down to, again, either for the par 72, you can make it a 71, go even farther, maybe even to a 70. And again, maybe with the par 71s, you could leave those as is or make them par 70s as well. And one of the things that's actually quite interesting, I would say, about the Granite Links setup is in that area of the state where the golf course is built. The conditions can actually get quite interesting. It's not, uncommon for it to have it be extremely windy there. I played it a number of times where I've lost my hat on a few occasions. So I think from the condition standpoint, it would be a really interesting test to see how the players could fare on it. Again, I don't think these are too short. And again, the reason why I say that and the reason why I went into, the aspects of TPC River Highlands earlier is, again, TPC River Highlands has been testing the tour players for quite some time at this point. It doesn't tip out at even 7,000 yards. And again, you can see neither of the routings here at Granite Links do as well. But again, I think some of the conditions here, especially with the wind, could provide some fascinating tests for the tour players. And just some of the views of the golf course in general are just really spectacular. So if you're up there at the top of the layout up towards the clubhouse, you can see the city of Boston on even a cloudy day. The views across the golf course are really quite spectacular. You can see quite a bit of the golf course from the top of the hill where the courses, each of the 9 holes start out as well. And I think if you've never been there to play golf, but you have been there even for just dinner, let's say, you'll know that the atmosphere at Granite Links can get pretty awesome and pretty lively. So I think it would be a great place for the tour to be, even from an atmosphere standpoint. So that's why I think, for those reasons, I think the Granite Links setup with its 27 holes, spectacular views, interesting conditions that it can provide, as well as just, again, the already lively atmosphere that it brings, even without a big event, I think it could be a very interesting place for the tour to check out. All right. Last but not least, for this one, we are actually departing the state of Massachusetts. And this one, I think, is one of the ones that I'm probably most excited about as a potential prospect if it ever were to be considered. And that is the Golf Club of New England in Stratham, New Hampshire, which is located about 20 minutes away from the city of Portsmouth. Now, if you're not familiar with the Golf Club of New England, this really is a monster and a beast of a golf course. And I say that in a very much a complimentary tone. It's an Arnold Palmer designed course. It is perhaps the most substantial test of golf that is offered in the state of New Hampshire. And it is going to be hosting, I believe it's one of the stroke play series events or one of the match play series events, one of the two in the state of New Hampshire this year. So if you haven't had an opportunity to see it, again, it is a private course, so you'd have to know somebody, of course, to play it. But there is a tournament that will be hosted by the New Hampshire Golf Association this year at this golf course. And so if you're able to get over to it to see some of the play there, this really is a truly miraculous golf course and a truly amazing test of golf here. In terms of its statistics, the golf course plays, again, this is coming from the USGA Gin app, it plays at 7,673 yards from the back tees with a 77.5 rating and a 148 slope, and that is a par 72. To give you an idea of how long some of the holes play at this golf course, some of the par fours actually do exceed 500 yards. I think there's at least one that does. The par 5 holes here are 549, 600, 574, and 609. So again, I think in terms of an overall layout, the golf course has more than enough yardage to test the players out in a fine fashion. And there's some interesting history as well of competitive golf being hosted at the Golf Club of New England. So this course, if you weren't familiar with it in its history, it was actually the host of the 2012 United States Junior Championship. And the player Brad Dahlke, who, if you're not familiar with him, he's certainly, I would say, one of the more prevalent and famous YouTube golfers at this point. But he had a substantial history of competitive golf going back to his college days. He played in the Masters. He was, I believe, runner-up at the United States Amateur in one of the years before he ended up going on to the YouTube golf career. But he played in this particular tournament, and he actually returned to the golf course on his YouTube channel last year in a great tour of New England with also good competitor Sean Walsh. So they partnered on an amazing tour of a lot of good golf courses in New England. This is the one that they chose for New Hampshire. And he shot, I think it was about 3 under par during his filming of his round, there last year. And then Keegan Bradley also played 9 holes at this golf course for the Barstool, 4Play YouTube golf channel last year as well. And he shot 1 over par for the 9 holes that he played. So again, you can see that although it hasn't necessarily hosted, I would say, sort of that PGA Tour level caliber tournament. You have PGA Tour players and PGA Tour caliber players coming here on YouTube channels to see what they can do. Not necessarily putting up really significant numbers. Again, it was a great test for both of those players in those, so I guess sort of micro tests on those YouTube videos. And again, it does have a history of hosting at least one massive tournament for the USGA in that 2012 US Junior. In terms of logistics, the golf course is really just about an hour from the city of Boston. And again, it is going north, so not necessarily a concern, not necessarily any major concerns, I would say, from a traffic perspective there. It's usually pretty easy to get up to that area of New England from Boston, just straight up 95 in most cases. And I would say also that from a hosting perspective, again, the golf course, I think, puts up more than a good enough test. But also, I think just the area would be a really great area for the tour to come to. The state of New Hampshire doesn't really host a lot of major sporting events at, say, the national level. You do have the International Speedway there in Loudon, which hosts usually, I think, a NASCAR race once a year, even now. So there is precedent for some pretty significant sporting events being held in the state of New Hampshire in that regard. And then I think just the area itself, from an economic standpoint, could benefit greatly. If you have a big event like the tour, a tour event coming in, I think it only does good things for the economy of the region. And I think it would just offer the attendees so many great areas to check out, either the day of the tournament or after the tournament. So again, for example, you've got the seacoast of New Hampshire there, the Portsmouth area, places like that. Just below the border in New Hampshire, you have places like Newburyport, which are always just incredible to go to, especially on a nice summer day. And then up into the southern parts of Maine there, like York, Algonquin, even up to Kennebunkport. I think there's just a lot to offer in that area as far as not just the golf, but also things that people could do before and after the golf. Just really awesome areas. And again, I think the economic impact for that area of New England would be just awesome if the tour came there as well. So another reason why I think this is one of the options that I'm probably a little bit more passionate about if you haven't already been able to tell. All right, so those were the 5 courses that I thought would be interesting to see if they could put up a test for the PGA Tour, should the PGA Tour come back to Boston. So again, we have perhaps the most obvious option in just simply going back to TPC Boston. We had Great Horse out in Hamden, Maine, the substantial Brian Silva test out there in the Springfield area. We had Crosswinds Golf Club and Granite Links on the South Shore area in Plymouth and Quincy, respectively, with their fascinating 27-hole layouts that you could get pretty creative there. And then again, you just have the monster near the coast in southern New Hampshire, the Golf Club of New England. All right, so that'll do it for this exercise, just to see what events, what places could potentially be good tests for the tour should they come back to the Boston area. And so, certainly give this video a like, but also leave a comment down below. How did I do in my assessment of some of the venues here in the New England region as far as being potentially good tests for the tour? And perhaps what are some of your thoughts on some of the venues that could potentially be interesting hosts for the tour as well? So I think this is an interesting subject to discuss in light of, again, the PGA Tour CEO, Brian Rolapp, mentioning the Boston area as a potential area to come back to. So leave a comment below. What are some of the courses that you think might be good layouts as well? What do you think of our choices here? And as always, please be sure to subscribe to the channel to make sure that you don't miss more of our content like this coming forward down the line. All right, thanks very much, and we'll see you in the next video.